I am Ella Davis, 60 years old, a widow, a mother, and lately it feels like I've spent a lifetime being both. I raised my boy alone after Marcus was gone. James is 22 now, and I can't even begin to imagine what I would have done without him, even though sometimes it feels like I'm carrying him and the weight of the world on my shoulders. We live in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and not much ever changes. It's a place where the only way out is to work hard and hope you don't get stuck. I can tell you I'm tired, so tired, but it's funny how tired feels different when it's for someone you love. I wake up at 5 every morning, not because I have to, but because I'm used to it. I've always been an early riser. Marcus used to say it was my way of getting a head start on the day, but now it's just a habit. I make the coffee black just the way I like it. I used to take my time, savoring it while I read the paper. But now I drink it quickly as I scramble to make sure James is awake, dressed, and ready for class. It's just the two of us. Well, technically, it's just me. James is in college now. I never thought I'd see that day. When Marcus passed, I didn't know how I would make it. We didn't have much, but I promised myself, and I promised Marcus, that I would give James everything I had. I pushed myself every single day. I worked long hours at the local grocery store, sometimes picking up shifts I shouldn't have, just so I could make sure James had what he needed. And he did. He always had what he needed. But sometimes, I wonder if that was enough. James, my sweet boy, he doesn't see it. Or maybe he chooses not to see it. He's been so focused on his studies that he doesn't realize how much of me is left behind. He doesn't know how many days I've gone without eating just so I could make sure he had enough money for his books, his rent, his car repairs. He doesn't know how many nights I've stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I've done enough. If I've been enough. When Marcus was alive, we dreamed big. We talked about the future, about the life we'd build. But when he died, those dreams crumbled, and I was left to pick up the pieces. And you know what? I didn't mind. I never did. Because every sacrifice, every late night, every tired moment was worth it if it meant James had a better shot at life than I did. But sometimes, I wonder if I'm doing him more harm than good. He doesn't know what it's like to go without. Not really. Not like I did. He doesn't understand that every meal I put on the table was earned through sweat and exhaustion. And the truth is, I'm not sure he ever will. Because I've spent so many years building him up, protecting him, giving him everything I could, that I've forgotten to take care of myself. I've forgotten what it feels like to be seen as more than just his mother. More than just a woman with a job. More than just a tired, invisible woman who spends her days in the grocery store. But that's not his fault. That's mine. I keep telling myself it'll get better. That when he graduates, he'll understand. That maybe one day he'll look back and see how much I've sacrificed. But right now, in this moment, all I see is a boy who's trying to live his own life, and I'm standing on the sidelines, watching it all happen. I want to be happy for him. I am. I am so proud of him, but I can't help but feel like I'm losing him. And if I'm being honest, sometimes I wonder if he'll even remember the sacrifices I've made. Or if one day he'll look at me like I'm just another old woman with no purpose other than to remind him of where he came from. It scares me more than I care to admit. I can hear James in the next room now, talking to his friends on the phone. He's getting ready for class. He's almost done with school. One more year, and he'll be free to start his own life. Maybe that's when it'll finally happen. Maybe when he's standing on his own 2 feet, I'll be able to breathe again. But even as I think that, a part of me is scared. Scared that when he leaves, I'll be left with nothing but my empty house and my tired hands. Scared that I'll have given him everything and he won't even notice. But I can't think like that, because I'm his mother. And no matter how tired I am, no matter how much I've sacrificed, I'll keep going, because that's what mothers do. We keep going for our children, for the ones we love, even when it feels like we're drowning. I hear James call out from the kitchen, asking if there's anything for breakfast. My heart catches in my throat. I haven't made anything special, but I know he'll eat it anyway. And I'll be okay with that, because that's my role. That's what I've been doing for all these years. I'll keep doing it, because, for me, being his mother is everything. It was late September when the air in the grocery store finally started to cool, a rare treat in the thick, sticky heat of the South. I remember that day like it was yesterday, one of those mornings that feels heavy with a kind of quiet promise, as if the world is standing still just long enough to catch its breath. It was around 7:30 when I first saw him. Mr. Robert Montgomery. I had heard his name before, of course. Everyone in town knew Robert Montgomery. He was one of those men whose presence filled the room before he even stepped through the door, someone whose wealth and reputation were woven into the very fabric of the town. He had been widowed for 5 years by then, after losing his wife to cancer. But Robert didn't talk about it much. People just said he was a quiet man, a businessman, successful but humble, or at least that was the story I had always heard. I was on my lunch break, sitting at the back of the store, nibbling on the sandwich I'd hastily packed that morning. The hum of the fluorescent lights above me seemed louder than usual. I couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from the front of the store, where the regulars were gathered by the magazine racks. "Did you hear? Robert Montgomery's wife passed away last week," I heard one of the women say, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sympathy that made me uncomfortable. "Yes," I heard. Another woman responded, "But you know what they say. He's a millionaire. He'll be just fine." I didn't know why, but something about that made my chest tighten. Not the $1 million talk, it wasn't new to me, but the idea of someone being alone like that, losing their partner and facing it all in silence. It seemed to reach into a place I had kept hidden for so long, a place that still remembered what it was like to lose someone, to feel that empty space left behind by a husband who wasn't coming home. Then, as if the universe had heard me, he walked in. I didn't expect him to be there. He didn't strike me as the type to need anything from a small-town grocery store, but there he was, tall and broad-shouldered, his suit a shade too expensive for the fluorescent-lit aisles. He moved with a quiet confidence, like someone who had spent years learning to blend in but never quite did. I watched him from behind the counter, adjusting a stack of cans as if my hands weren't doing it all by themselves. I didn't know what made him turn around, but when he did, his eyes met mine and something shifted. Not much, just a slight pause, but enough for me to feel the change in the air. He was, after all, someone who probably never had to look at the people around him. Not like this, but he did. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth, yet somehow warm like an old whiskey that had been resting far too long. I straightened up, surprised at the formality of his tone. "Yes," I replied, clearing my throat. "I've just had a bit of a mishap with my groceries," he said, holding up a bag that had split at the seams. "Do you happen to have some tape? I seem to have misplaced my bag." I smiled a little and nodded, pointing him in the direction of the office. "It's just around the corner, Mr. Montgomery. I'll get you sorted in a minute." His eyes softened. "Robert, please, Mr. Montgomery is my father." I didn't know what to make of that. I wasn't used to people like him treating me with such courtesy. Maybe it was just because he needed help, maybe because his mother had taught him well. Either way, it left a mark. I went to the office and came back with the tape. He was standing by the counter now, his posture relaxed but still dignified. He had already finished rearranging the groceries into a new bag, his fingers handling them with an almost deliberate care. There was something about the way he moved that seemed almost too practiced, like a man who had spent years learning to hide behind a mask of composure. "Thank you," he said, as I handed him the tape. "That's very kind of you." "It's no trouble, Robert," I replied, almost reflexively, using his first name. Something about the way he spoke, the way he looked, made me feel like I should be formal, but I couldn't quite bring myself to treat him any differently than anyone else who walked in needing a hand. Maybe that was the problem with me. I treated people the same, whether they had millions or nothing. He looked at me for a long moment, as though studying me, before offering a soft smile. "You work here often?" "Most days," I said, my voice trailing off. "I'm Ella." His smile widened, but only slightly. "Ella, it's a pleasure." I nodded, watching him leave the store. I couldn't help but feel a pang in my chest. I didn't know why I was so rattled by the encounter. He was just another man, after all, one who probably wouldn't remember my name 5 minutes after leaving. But there was something in his eyes, something like a quiet understanding, a recognition of the loneliness in the world. Over the next few weeks, Robert became a regular visitor at the store. It wasn't anything unusual. He came in, bought his groceries, and left. But something changed in those few weeks. We began to talk, not just about the usual things, groceries, weather, but something deeper. I could see it, though I think he might have been trying to hide it. There was a sadness in him, an emptiness that no amount of money or success could fill. It reminded me of myself in some ways, when I was alone after Marcus passed, just moving through the motions, trying to keep things together for James. But Robert wasn't trying to keep things together. He was just trying to survive, one grocery trip at a time. One day, he came in and stood at the counter with a kind of unease in his posture, his usual confidence gone. He didn't seem like the man who had walked in that first day. The lines around his eyes were deeper now, more pronounced. "I need a favor," he said, leaning against the counter as if the weight of his own words had caught up to him. I wasn't sure what to say, but I nodded. "What's the favor?" I need someone to talk to, Ella. It's been a while since I've had a conversation that wasn't about business. I've been carrying a lot of things, and I don't know how to let go." There it was, the real Robert Montgomery, the man behind the business suits and the walls of wealth. He was broken, and I could see it. I didn't hesitate. "I'll listen." For the first time in months, Robert Montgomery didn't seem like the man with all the answers. He seemed like a man who was lost, like the rest of us, and he needed a hand to hold. And for reasons I didn't fully understand yet, I was willing to be that hand. I didn't expect that our brief exchange would turn into something more, but here I was, sitting across from Robert Montgomery in my little kitchen, a cup of coffee between us. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm, golden light through the windows, making everything look almost unreal, like a dream I wasn't quite ready to wake up from. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that fills the space between two people who don't really know how to start. I had brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the kind Marcus used to make on Sunday mornings when everything felt like it was still right in the world. Robert wasn't drinking his, though. He just held the cup in his hands, his fingers tracing the rim, looking out the window. "I didn't think I'd be here," he said softly, his voice low and raw. "I mean, not here, not in this place. It's been so long since I've had a real conversation, Ella. Since I've just talked." I didn't know what to say to that. So much of my life had been spent taking care of others, making sure everything was just so, that I never really stopped to think about what people needed. But Robert needed something, that much was clear. More than a cup of coffee, more than a friendly face. He needed someone to help him carry the weight he was holding. I shifted in my seat, unsure of what role I was playing. I didn't want to seem like a charity case, or like I was somehow elevating his problems just because they seemed bigger than my own. But there was a quiet sadness about him that made it impossible not to reach out, not to offer him whatever I could. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," I said. "But if you do, I'm here." He turned his gaze toward me, and for a moment I saw it, the depth of his exhaustion, his vulnerability. It was a side of him that I hadn't expected to see. Robert Montgomery, the man who seemed to have it all, was just as lost as the rest of us. "It's been hard since my wife passed," he said, his words tentative, like they were the first he'd said out loud in months. I didn't think I'd be okay. And then I told myself I didn't need to be okay, that I could just keep going and everything would work itself out. But the more I pushed, the emptier I felt. And now I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. I could see the weight of his words hanging in the air. He wasn't just talking about his wife. He was talking about everything, the business, the wealth, the loneliness that even money couldn't fill. He was a man adrift, and I couldn't help but feel the ache of recognition. It's hard losing someone like that, I said, my voice softer now. When Marcus died, I thought I'd never find my way again. I spent so many years focusing on what I had to do for James, what I had to do to survive, that I didn't even know what I wanted. But over time, I realized that I was just as lost as you feel. I didn't know who I was without him. Robert looked at me, as though surprised by the words coming out of my mouth. I suppose I didn't look like the kind of person who would talk about loss so openly. It was easier to keep things hidden, to keep up appearances, to pretend like everything was fine. "I'm sorry," he said after a beat, his voice so quiet that I almost didn't hear it. "I didn't mean to unload all this on you. It's just, you were kind to me when I didn't expect it, and I didn't realize how much I needed to hear someone else's voice." I shook my head, feeling the weight of his apology as if it were my own. "You don't need to apologize, Robert. We all carry things, you know? We just don't always show it. Sometimes we pretend it doesn't hurt, but it does. And maybe the hardest part is realizing that you don't have to do it alone." There it was, a small revelation, one I wasn't prepared for but could feel deep in my bones. We were both just people. People who had suffered. People who were trying to find our way. And for a brief moment in that quiet kitchen, there was no business mogul, no grocery store clerk, just two human beings looking for something to hold on to. Robert shifted in his chair, his eyes meeting mine with a look that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't sympathy. It was something else, something that felt almost like understanding. "I haven't been here for long," he said after a pause, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "But I think I could use someone to talk to. Someone who isn't in my life because of what I can do for them, someone who doesn't want anything from me. Someone like you." My heart skipped a beat, and for a split second, I wanted to pull away. I didn't know how to handle the weight of his words, the raw honesty in his eyes. But I didn't pull away. Instead, I found myself nodding, knowing that what he needed wasn't just another conversation. It was the kind of connection that happens when two people stop pretending. "I don't know what you're looking for, Robert," I said, my voice almost a whisper. "But I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to be here if that's what you need." He nodded, his shoulders slumping as if a burden had been lifted, even if only for a moment. "Thank you, Ella. You don't know how much this means." And there, in that simple exchange, something shifted. The walls that had kept me hidden, the walls I'd built around my heart to keep from being hurt again, began to crack. Not because of Robert, not because of his wealth or his influence, but because of his honesty, his willingness to let someone else in. It was something I had forgotten how to do. It was something I needed just as much as he did. For the rest of the evening, we talked, but not about anything important. We talked about the weather, about how the leaves were just starting to change color, about what James was up to at school. But there was a quiet understanding between us, one that didn't need to be said out loud. We had both been through something. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't the only one carrying the weight. As Robert stood to leave, I felt a strange sense of relief. Like maybe, just maybe, we were both starting to find our way back. Not to who we were before, but to who we could be now, in this moment. "I'll see you tomorrow, Ella," he said with a small, genuine smile. "And thanks again." "Anytime, Robert," I replied, my voice steady despite the sudden shift in the air. And as he walked out the door, I stood there, feeling something shift inside me. Maybe it wasn't a fix, not yet, but it was a start. a start to something real, something that had nothing to do with the past and everything to do with the present. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't so afraid of the future anymore. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The routine of the grocery store, the monotony of long shifts, and the quiet hours at home with James, nothing much changed, but everything felt different. It was as though a small shift in the universe had happened, and I was aware of it, though I couldn't quite name what it was. It wasn't just Robert's presence, or the way he seemed to open up to me when no one else had. It was something else entirely. It was the way I began to notice the cracks in my own life, the places where the walls I'd built around my heart had started to fall apart, one slow, quiet brick at a time. Robert had been back to the store a few times since that evening. Each time, we talked a little more about his wife, his past, the guilt he still carried about her death. And every time, I found myself listening with a depth I didn't know I had. He didn't talk about his business. He didn't ask about mine. We talked about our lives, the simple, unspoken parts of who we were. It wasn't about money or success. It was about loss, about learning to live with a hole inside you and still somehow keep going. I didn't know it then, but those conversations were starting to change something in me. Something deep, something I had ignored for years. One evening, about a month after that first conversation in my kitchen, Robert invited me to dinner. It wasn't anything fancy. He wasn't the type to ask for extravagant plans, but the offer itself was unexpected. He asked me in the same way he'd ask for a favor, with a soft honesty that made it impossible for me to say no. "I know this isn't exactly your thing, Ella," he said, when he caught me off guard at the store that day. "But I'd like to make you dinner. I've been cooking a bit more lately. Guess I need something to fill the quiet, and I thought you might like a change of pace." I didn't know why it felt so hard to say yes. Maybe it was the fact that I'd spent so many years running from anything that seemed too personal, too close. Maybe it was because I had gotten used to the walls I'd built around myself, walls that kept the pain, the loneliness, the exhaustion at bay. But something in me told me this might be different, so I said yes. The night came, and I found myself standing in front of his front door, nerves twisting in my stomach. I had no idea what to expect. He had invited me to his house a few times before, but we never really talked about personal things, always the same surface-level chatter. This was different. The house was quieter than I expected. It wasn't the kind of home I thought someone like Robert Montgomery would live in. It wasn't full of expensive art or grand furniture. Instead, it was a space that felt lived in, full of little imperfections that made it real, like someone was truly there, breathing life into it. "Come in," he said, greeting me at the door. His smile was softer than usual, like the weight of everything hadn't quite found its way into his eyes yet. "I hope you're hungry." I nodded, stepping inside. The smell of something savory filled the air, but there was no pressure, no grand expectations. It was just him, just us. We sat at the table, a small, modest thing near the window, and Robert served a simple dinner: roasted chicken, vegetables, and mashed potatoes. There were no grand gestures, no over-the-top conversation. But there was something in the way he looked at me, like he was waiting for me to speak first, waiting for me to open up just as he had. "I didn't know you could cook," I said, smiling, the warmth from the food filling the space between us. "I guess it's a new hobby," he said, almost shyly. "Something to do when there's too much time to think." I chuckled, picking up my fork. "I get that. I've been working all these years, always running from the quiet. But it's funny, sometimes, how the quiet sneaks up on you when you least expect it." He nodded, looking down at his plate. There was a silence between us, a shared understanding that didn't need words. We both knew what it was like to fill the silence, to drown out the quiet with the noise of life, whether it was work or people, or just pretending like everything was okay. I think I'm starting to realize something," I said, breaking the silence. I've been so busy being strong for everyone for James that I've forgotten what it's like to just be. Robert's eyes met mine. There was a flicker of something in them, like he understood what I meant, even without me having to explain it. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I've been doing the same. I thought I could handle everything, that if I just kept pushing, kept pretending I didn't miss her, I'd be okay, but I'm not. I took a deep breath, pushing my food aside for a moment. It's hard, isn't it? The pretending. I think for so long, I've convinced myself that I could make it on my own, that I could do it all. But I'm starting to see that maybe. Maybe I need help too. Maybe I need to let someone else in. His voice softened. Ella, you don't have to do it alone. There was something about the way he said it, something in the honesty of his words that made me feel less alone. Less like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. For a moment, it felt like everything had come full circle. The loneliness I had carried for so long, losing Marcus, losing pieces of myself in the process, was starting to feel like something I could finally let go of. I don't know how to let go, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to let people help. Robert smiled, the kind of smile that didn't have to be explained. It's not easy, but you're not alone in it. You're not the only one who's been carrying things. I know it's hard, but you don't have to keep doing it by yourself. That was the moment everything changed for me. In that quiet, simple evening with the roasted chicken and the soft glow of the lights, I realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop pretending. Time to stop carrying the weight of the world by myself. And maybe, just maybe, I could start letting someone else in. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to let Robert Montgomery into my life, not as a man with money or status, but as someone who understood the weight of loss and the quiet ache that comes with it. We finished our meal in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. It wasn't about the food or the house. It was about something deeper, something both fragile and real. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was next. I guess I'm learning, Robert, I said, looking up at him. It's okay to need someone. He nodded. Yeah, it really is. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. It was a few days after that dinner when I realized just how much had shifted. Things felt different now, not just with Robert, but with James too. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect, or that the weight of my responsibilities had magically disappeared. But there was something lighter in my step, something freer in the way I carried myself. It wasn't just the meals or the conversations that Robert and I had shared, or the quiet moments when he'd listened to me, as if my words actually mattered. It was the simple fact that I was letting go. I was finally allowing myself to stop pretending I had to do it all, and that was a relief in itself. But with that relief came fear that letting go meant losing control. Fear that if I allowed myself to lean on someone else, even just a little, I might crumble under the weight of it, and I couldn't afford that, not with James depending on me. James had been distant, more so than usual. He was busy with his studies, of course, but there was something else in his eyes these days, a kind of detachment, a disconnect that hurt in ways I couldn't fully explain. The distance between us had widened, and it left a cold ache in my chest that no amount of conversation or good intentions could ease. I remember the moment it hit me, when I realized that the emotional distance between James and I wasn't just a phase or a side effect of him growing up. It was the result of something much deeper, something I hadn't fully been willing to face. It was a Friday night, and I had just gotten home from the store. The house was quieter than usual. The hum of the refrigerator was the loudest sound in the room as I kicked off my shoes, tired from the long shift. I'd been hoping James would be home, that maybe we could sit down and talk. Maybe we could bridge the gap that had been growing between us. But when I entered his room, it was empty, his bed made but untouched. That's when it hit me, the realization that I was losing him, and it wasn't because of anything he'd done. It was because of everything I hadn't done. I hadn't been there in the way he needed me. I hadn't been present in the way that mattered most. I had been too busy surviving, too busy trying to hold everything together, that I hadn't realized my son needed me to be something more. Something more than just a provider. Something more than just a mother who kept everything afloat. I sat down on his bed, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The silence in the house felt oppressive, thick, like it was closing in around me. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the realization that I had given James everything I thought he needed, but somehow, in all of it, I had forgotten to give him the one thing that mattered most: my attention, my time, my presence. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, but eventually, the sound of the front door opening broke the silence. I stood up quickly, wiping the tears I hadn't realized had fallen. James walked in, his backpack slung over his shoulder. He didn't look at me at first, just walked into the kitchen. But when he did glance at me, there was that same look in his eyes, the one that had been there for weeks, if not months. It was the look of someone who had grown used to disappointment, to neglect, to a mother who was always there but never really present. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. The silence between us felt like a wall I couldn't climb over. "Mom, I'm fine," James said, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. "You don't have to worry about me." But I was worried. I had always been worried, even when I didn't show it. I had always tried to protect him from everything, from every hurt, every disappointment, every painful thing that might come his way. But in doing so, I had shut him out. I had tried so hard to protect him from the world that I had forgotten to show him how to face it. I couldn't be that kind of mother anymore. I couldn't be the one who was always holding everything together but never actually showing up. "James, I'm not sure I've been the mother you needed," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I've been so focused on making sure we had everything we needed that I didn't see what we really needed. I didn't see you, not really." James stopped in his tracks, his hand still on the refrigerator door, frozen in place. He turned to face me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something soft in his eyes. Not anger, not resentment, but something like longing. Longing for the connection we once had, the bond we used to share before everything became about survival. "I just wanted you to be there, Mom," he said, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable than I had heard in months. "I wanted you to stop trying so hard to make things perfect and just be with me. I don't need everything, I just need you." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart ached as I realized how much I had missed, the simple moments, the small exchanges, the connection I had taken for granted. I had been so busy trying to fix everything that I had forgotten to hold on to what mattered most. "I'm so sorry, James," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. "I'm so sorry. I've been so focused on trying to make your life easier, I didn't see that I was making it harder. I haven't been there for you like I should have, but I'm here now, I'm really here." He stood still for a moment, his gaze never leaving mine. And then, as if the weight of the moment was too much for him to carry, he stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Without saying a word, he wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't a grand gesture, nothing dramatic. It was just a hug, a real hug, the kind of hug that I had been missing for so long. "I'm not mad at you, Mom," he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. I just needed to know that you were still there, that we were still in this together." We stood there for a long time, just holding each other. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't some grand reconciliation. But it was a start, a real start. When we finally pulled apart, I wiped my eyes, embarrassed by how emotional I had gotten. James smiled softly at me, a real smile, the kind that told me he understood. "I'm not perfect either, you know," he said. I've been shutting you out too, but I think we can figure this out, together. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. For the first time in years, I believed that we could find our way back to each other, not by being perfect, but by being real. That night, we didn't talk about anything profound. We didn't discuss the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. But as we sat down to eat dinner, just the two of us, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long: peace. I was here. He was here. And for once, that was enough. The days following that quiet moment with James felt like a turning point, though it was hard to pinpoint exactly when things changed. It wasn't a dramatic shift, not something that could be measured in grand gestures or sudden epiphanies. It was more like a gentle unfolding, a soft adjustment in the rhythm of our lives, as though the universe had shifted ever so slightly in the right direction, and now we were slowly finding our way back to each other. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is. There were still moments when James was distant, lost in his thoughts, or buried in his textbooks. But there was something different in the way he looked at me now, something I hadn't seen in months. A warmth, a recognition. And every time I caught that glimpse in his eyes, I knew we were moving forward. We were figuring it out, together. At the same time, there was Robert. He'd been consistent in his kindness, in the way he checked in on me, the way he listened without judgment. We spoke almost every day, sometimes about trivial things, sometimes about deeper matters. It wasn't always about what was said, it was about the connection. The simple act of having someone listen, someone who wasn't trying to fix anything but just be there. That was what I'd been missing for so long, and I didn't even know it. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Robert asked me to meet him again. "It's been a while," he'd said over the phone. His voice light, but there was something else in it, something I couldn't quite place. "I thought we could grab some coffee, maybe talk." Of course, I said yes. I had no reason not to. And honestly, after all that had happened, James, the shift in our relationship, the emotional weight of everything, it felt good to know that someone outside of my own little world was there to talk to. When we met at the local cafe, Robert looked almost the same, his usual crisp shirt, his dark, carefully styled hair. But there was something different about him that day. He seemed more grounded, like he had come to a realization of his own, something I couldn't yet put into words. "Ella," he started after a few minutes of small talk. "There's something I've been thinking about lately, something I haven't said out loud, and I think it's time I do." I raised an eyebrow, wondering where this conversation was headed. It wasn't like Robert to be cryptic, but there was a serious tone to his voice that made me pause. "You've been through a lot," he continued, his eyes meeting mine. "And I think I have too. We're both at a crossroads, aren't we?" I nodded, not sure how to respond. It was true, I was at a crossroads. Maybe I had been for a long time, but I had never had the time or the courage to stop and really look at where I was headed. "I've spent most of my life focusing on the wrong things," Robert said quietly. "Building my empire, building the business, pushing through everything, even when I lost the most important person in my life. And I know you've done the same thing, Ella. You've put everything into making sure James had everything, into surviving, into being what everyone else needed you to be. But at what cost?" His words landed like a weight on my chest. It was a question I had been asking myself without really acknowledging it. What had I sacrificed in my own life to keep everything going? What had I given up in the pursuit of taking care of everyone else? "I don't want to make the same mistake again," Robert said, his voice steady but tinged with something deeper, something almost raw. I think it's time for me to stop running from what really matters. And I think you feel the same way." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected him to say something like that. But his words resonated deep within me, and I realized he was right. We had both been running from our grief, from our loneliness, from the parts of ourselves that had been broken along the way. We had buried so much under the weight of everything we thought we were supposed to be. "What are you trying to say, Robert?" I asked, my voice low, unsure of where this was heading. I'm saying, he paused as though choosing his words carefully, that I don't want to be alone anymore. I don't want to spend my days pretending everything is fine when it's not. I want something real. I want to take a step back, stop hiding behind my success, and maybe, just maybe, start living for myself, for us. The silence that followed his words was thick with meaning. I could feel my heart beating louder in my chest, a strange mixture of excitement and fear swirling inside me. What was he saying? Did he mean what I thought he meant? You mean you want to be with me? The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I couldn't tell if I was relieved or terrified. Robert didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. I'm not asking you to have all the answers, Ella. I'm not asking for some grand gesture or for us to figure everything out overnight, but I want to see where this goes. I want to see if we can build something together, not because of what we've lost, but because of what we can still have. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. It wasn't that I hadn't felt this pull toward him. It was there, stronger than anything I had felt in years, but I hadn't allowed myself to fully acknowledge it. I hadn't allowed myself to think about what it would mean to open up, to take that leap. I don't know if I can do that, I said quietly, my voice trembling with uncertainty. I've been so focused on James, on keeping everything together, that I don't know how to be anything but what I've been, a mother, a provider, a survivor. Robert's smile softened and he squeezed my hand gently. I know, Ella, I know, but maybe it's time to let go of the things that aren't serving you anymore. Maybe it's time to let yourself be something more. His words hung in the air like a challenge, a possibility, a door waiting to be opened. And I realized, with a kind of quiet certainty, that I wasn't ready to close that door just yet. Not with Robert, not with what we had shared, not with the way he made me feel like I could breathe again. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I whispered, my heart in my throat, but I want to be. I want to be with you, Robert. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I wasn't just holding everything together, where I wasn't constantly surviving. I imagined a future where I could live not for anyone else, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Robert smiled then, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. Then let's take it slow, together. And just like that, the walls I had spent so long building around myself began to crumble, bit by bit. Slowly, but surely, I was learning to let go of the past, to stop living in survival mode, and to start embracing the possibility of something real. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. It's strange how quickly things can change. One minute, you're standing still, pretending to have everything under control, and the next, you're being swept along, unsure of where you're headed, but too far in to turn back. That's how it felt when Robert and I started to figure things out. At first, I didn't know if I was ready to take that step. I wasn't sure if I could open up to him in the way he seemed to want me to. But with every conversation, with every laugh we shared, with every moment of vulnerability, I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, I could. Still, I wasn't fully prepared for the moment when I would have to face the biggest change in my life. The moment I would have to make a choice. James had been different lately. Better in some ways, but distant in others. After that long overdue conversation between us, I thought we were finally finding our way back. But he was still buried in his studies, his friends, his own world. The gap that had grown between us still felt too wide to cross sometimes. And that ache, that quiet fear that I was losing him, hadn't gone away. I couldn't escape the reality that no matter how hard I tried to hold on, he was growing up. And I didn't know how to hold on to someone who was already slipping through my fingers. It was a Friday night when everything came to a head. I'd just finished a shift at the store and was about to head home when I received a text from James. "Can we talk?" I didn't know what to expect. My heart jumped into my throat as I stared at the words on the screen. I hadn't expected to hear from him, not like this. But there it was, a small crack in the distance that had grown between us. I drove home quickly, my mind racing. I could feel the weight of the world in that small question, as if everything that had been unsaid between us was about to come rushing to the surface. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, taking a deep breath. I wasn't sure if I was ready to have this conversation, but I knew it was time. We couldn't keep dancing around the truth. When I opened the door, James was already sitting at the kitchen table, his hands folded in front of him. His face looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. And for the first time in a while, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before: uncertainty. "Mom," he started, his voice quieter than usual, "I've been thinking a lot lately about us." I felt my chest tighten at the words. I had no idea what he was about to say, but I braced myself. "I know things haven't been great," he continued, his eyes dropping to the table. "And I know I've been distant. I haven't made things easy for you, especially after Dad died. But I don't know how to say this." I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready, James, but you're here now, and I'm ready to listen." He looked up at me then, his gaze steady but filled with something raw, something almost vulnerable. "I'm going to move out, Mom." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I hadn't expected that, not like this, not so soon. I blinked, my mouth going dry as I tried to process what he was saying. "Move out," I repeated, barely able to form the words. "But, James, you're still in school. I thought we were just starting to." "I know, Mom," he interrupted, his voice shaking slightly. "I know, but it's time. I feel like I've been holding myself back, like I've been trapped here. It's not that I don't love you, I do, but I need to figure things out on my own. I need to find my own way, and I think it's time for me to go." The room seemed to close in around me as I processed his words. On one hand, I understood. He was 22, an adult, ready to start carving out his own path in the world. But on the other hand, the thought of him leaving, of him stepping out into the world without me, without my constant presence, left a hollow ache in my chest. I didn't know how to let go. I didn't know how to give him the space he needed without feeling like I was losing him completely. I fought to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. "You're not trapped here, James. You don't have to leave because you think you need to. You don't have to prove anything to me." He shook his head, his expression softening. "I'm not leaving because of you, Mom. I'm leaving because of me. I need to figure out who I am without everything always being about what you need, what's best for me. I need to stand on my own 2 feet." It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to hear. My boy, my baby, was ready to leave, to spread his wings, to build his life without me there every step of the way. I had spent his whole life trying to protect him, to make sure he had everything he needed, and now he was telling me he needed to go. "I'm proud of you, James," I whispered, my voice trembling, "but I'm scared. I'm scared of losing you. I've spent so many years taking care of you that I don't know how to let go." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "You're not losing me, Mom. I'll always need you. I'll always be your son, but I need to be my own person. And I think you need to be your own person too." The tears finally spilled over and I let them fall. Not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of love. A love so deep that it hurt. A love that had carried me through years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of moments when I thought I couldn't keep going. And now, that love was telling me it was time to let him go. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'll always need you, but it's time for me to go." And as I sat there, holding his hand, I realized he was right. It was time. Time for him to step into the world on his own, to find his path, and time for me to start living for myself, to stop hiding behind the walls I'd built around my heart. "I love you too, James," I said, my voice hoarse. "And I'll always be here for you, but I get it. It's time for you to fly." I didn't know what the future held or how we would both navigate this next chapter. But I knew one thing for sure: letting go was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was the most important. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for both of us to start living for ourselves. As he stood up to leave, I wrapped my arms around him one last time, not as a mother holding on, but as someone who knew the time had come for both of us to move forward. "I'll always love you," I whispered into his ear. "I know, Mom," he said softly. "I'll always love you too." And with that, my son walked out of the door, and I was left standing there at the crossroads of my own life, wondering what came next. The house felt too quiet the moment James left. It was the kind of silence that echoed through the walls, filling up the corners of the rooms with a heaviness that hadn't been there before. For years, I had been living for him, his needs, his future, his everything. And now, as I stood in the empty hallway, I realized that for the first time in a long while, there was no one to live for but myself. The thought should have been freeing, but instead, it felt like a void, a vast emptiness I wasn't sure how to fill. I wandered through the house aimlessly, my eyes drifting from one room to another. The familiar surroundings were starting to look foreign, almost like a life I hadn't been living at all. The walls that had once been adorned with James's school achievements, his little drawings, his sports trophies, now felt like reminders of everything I'd given up. They were symbols of the years I had spent trying to protect him, trying to give him a better life. But in doing so, I had lost myself somewhere along the way. I made my way to the kitchen, the heart of the house, where everything always seemed to happen. The hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock on the wall were the only sounds, and it felt too loud in the absence of conversation. The house was quieter than I could bear, and the silence wrapped itself around me like a blanket I couldn't shake off. The thought of picking up the phone and calling Robert crossed my mind, but I hesitated. Our connection had deepened over the past few months, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. I had told myself that I needed time to process everything: James leaving, the new space in my life, the quiet that felt so foreign. But every time I thought of Robert, I felt a pull I didn't want to ignore. I was still standing in the kitchen when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Robert. "How are you holding up?" I stared at the message, feeling a rush of emotion that I couldn't fully explain. Robert had been patient with me, giving me space when I needed it, but always there, always steady. He knew about James leaving, and I knew that he had been giving me time to figure out my next steps. But I also knew that time was running out, that I couldn't keep putting off what felt like the inevitable. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before I typed back. "I'm okay, just adjusting. I understand. If you need to talk, I'm here." His words were simple, but there was a warmth to them that made my chest tighten. I had spent so much of my life being strong, being the one who held everything together. But in that moment, I realized I didn't have to be the strong one anymore. I didn't have to carry it all alone. "I think I need to talk," I typed back, my fingers shaking slightly as I pressed send. It only took a few minutes for him to reply. "I'll be over in half an hour." As I set my phone down, I felt a strange sense of relief, mixed with nervousness. I didn't know what was going to happen when Robert arrived, but I knew that whatever it was a step towards something new. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I was willing to face it. Half an hour later, the doorbell rang. I took a moment to collect myself, wiping my hands on my jeans, and then I opened the door. Robert stood there, his expression calm, but there was something in his eyes, an understanding, a quiet empathy that made my heart flutter with a strange mix of fear and hope. "Ella," he said softly, his voice low, "how are you really doing?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stepped aside, allowing him to enter the house. His presence felt like a comfort, like a familiar anchor in the middle of my uncertainty. I led him to the kitchen, where we both sat down at the table, the same place where so many of our conversations had started. I don't know, Robert, I said, my voice unsteady. I thought I was ready for this, ready for James to leave, but now that he's gone, I don't know what to do with myself. The house feels empty. My life feels empty. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me as though he were giving me space to say what I needed to. And I realized with a strange clarity that I had been holding onto so much for so long. So much fear, so much expectation, so much hurt. I had spent so many years building walls around myself, protecting myself from the unknown, from the vulnerability of truly living for myself, and now I had to face it. James leaving was supposed to be a new chapter, wasn't it? I continued, my voice quieter now. But instead, it feels like a door has closed, and I don't know how to open the next one. I've spent my whole life taking care of him, making sure he was okay. But now I'm lost. I don't know who I am without him. I don't know who I am without being a mother. Robert leaned forward, his gaze soft but steady. Ella, you've always been more than just a mother. You've been a woman, a person with dreams, with desires, with a life that didn't stop when you had James. You've just forgotten it for a while, but it's still there. And now it's time for you to remember it. His words were gentle, but they hit me like a wave. The truth was simple, almost painfully so. I had been so focused on the role I'd taken on, the identity I'd created for myself as James's mother, that I had forgotten everything else. I had forgotten that I was more than just a caretaker, more than just someone who had to hold everything together. I don't know where to start, I whispered, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. You start by letting go, Robert said, his voice low yet firm. Letting go of the things that weigh you down. Letting go of the guilt, the fear, the responsibility that isn't yours to carry anymore. You start by remembering who you are when you're not taking care of everyone else. I looked at him, my heart racing. He was right, of course. I had spent so many years holding on to everything, thinking that if I just kept going, everything would be okay. But now I had to let go. I had to give myself permission to be something more than what I had been, something more than just a mother, just a provider. I had to rediscover myself. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice trembling, scared of who I might be if I let go of everything I've been holding on to. Robert reached across the table, taking my hand in his. I know, Ella, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, and you're stronger than you realize. I squeezed his hand, feeling the truth in his words. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was living. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Something that I had always been too afraid to embrace. But now, with Robert beside me, I was ready to face it. The space between us had always felt like a gap, a chasm that we couldn't cross. But in that moment, with his hand in mine, I realized that it wasn't a gap at all. It was just a space waiting to be filled, waiting for me to step into it. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was ready to do just that. The days after our conversation, with Robert sitting across from me, holding my hand, felt like the slow turning of a page I had been too afraid to open. The house was still quiet, but the silence no longer pressed against me like a weight. It wasn't that the emptiness of the house had disappeared. It was that I had finally started to breathe in it. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from the silence. I was learning how to sit with it, how to let it fill me with possibilities instead of fear. I spent the next few days doing things I hadn't allowed myself to do in a long time. Little things. Simple things. I walked to the park by myself one morning, something I hadn't done in ages. The air was cool, crisp with the faint scent of fall. I had always loved the park, but it had become one of those places I passed without noticing. Another part of the world I had ignored in my race to keep everything running smoothly. But that morning, it was like seeing it for the first time. I sat on a bench by the fountain, the sound of the water soothing in the quiet. There were children playing, their laughter carrying on the breeze, and I found myself smiling at the innocence of it. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed feeling like part of the world, rather than just existing in it. Later that week, I called the community center and signed up for a pottery class. It was something I'd always wanted to try, but I had always brushed it off. There was always something else to do, someone else to take care of. But now, with James gone and the house feeling too still, I realized I needed to find something for myself. I needed to remember what it felt like to be Ella, not just James's mother. When I walked into the class that first night, I felt a wave of nervousness. The room was filled with people of all ages, some older, some younger, all sitting around tables with lumps of clay in front of them. I felt out of place at first, unsure of what I was doing there, but then I took a deep breath and sat down. The instructor, a woman named Carla, greeted me with a warm smile. "First time?" she asked, her tone kind and welcoming. I nodded. "Yes, I've always wanted to try this." "Welcome to the world of clay," she said, handing me a lump of soft, cool clay. "It's therapeutic, trust me." I rolled up my sleeves and started to work. The coolness of the clay beneath my fingers felt strangely comforting, like a connection to something real, something tangible. As I shaped the clay, I realized I hadn't felt this focused, this present, in years. For that hour, I wasn't thinking about the house, about Robert, about James, or the overwhelming pressure I had felt for so long. I was just here, in this moment, with nothing to prove. It was liberating. After class, I felt lighter. Like I had unlocked something inside me that had been buried under years of obligation. I was starting to remember who I was before I was always someone's caretaker. I wasn't just a mother or a worker or a provider. I was me, Ella, and I hadn't known how much I'd missed her until now. The following weeks passed in a blur of pottery classes, walks in the park, and quiet evenings at home. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but the small changes began to add up. I found myself taking care of my own needs for the first time in so long. I spent more time on myself, on my health, my interests, my own joy. Robert was there too, but he didn't push. He simply supported quietly and steadily, reminding me that I didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. We still talked every day, sometimes about nothing at all, and sometimes about everything. One evening, after I had come home from class, Robert invited me out for a drink. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I agreed, eager for a change of pace. We met at a small cafe downtown, the same one where we had first shared our coffee together weeks before. It felt like we had come full circle, but in a way that made everything feel fresh again. We sat down at a table near the window, and the moment he looked at me, I could see something in his eyes, something that had always been there, but that I had only just begun to understand. The connection between us had grown in subtle ways, like the gentle opening of a flower, and I realized that I had been afraid to acknowledge it, to really see it. "Ella," Robert began, his voice steady, but with a quiet weight to it, "I want to be honest with you. I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we've built in this time we've spent together." I met his gaze, unsure of where this conversation was going. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't want this to be temporary," he said, his hand gently resting on mine. "I've been through a lot, and I know you have too. But the truth is, I've found something in you that I didn't even realize I was looking for. I've found someone who makes me feel like there's more to life than just getting by." I swallowed, feeling a knot form in my chest. "Robert, I'm not sure I'm ready for anything permanent. I don't know if I can be that person for someone else. I'm still figuring out who I am." "I know," he said gently, his thumb brushing over the back of my hand. "And I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I just want you to know that I'm here. And if you ever decide you're ready, I'll be here too." His words hung in the air between us, and for the first time, I allowed myself to truly consider them. The thought of being with Robert, of building something together, was a daunting one. But in that moment, with his hand in mine, I realized I didn't have to rush it. I didn't have to force it. We were both healing, both learning to live with the scars we carried, and maybe, just maybe, we could do that together. I don't know what the future holds, I said, my voice soft but sure, but I know I'm not afraid of it anymore. He smiled, and I saw the relief in his eyes, as though he had been holding his breath too. Then let's take it one step at a time, Ella. We've both got time. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something that had been absent for so long: hope. It wasn't a perfect kind of hope. It was fragile and it was raw, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking forward, not just surviving, but living. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know exactly what the next chapter would look like. But I knew one thing: I wasn't doing it alone anymore. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The rebirth of my life wasn't going to happen overnight, but I was finally starting to believe that it could happen. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was ready to face whatever came next. The months that followed felt like a delicate balancing act, not just between my past and my present, but between the person I had been and the person I was beginning to become. I had spent so many years immersed in the life of others, in the life of James, of keeping up appearances, of surviving. But now, in this new chapter, I was learning to be a participant in my own life. To no longer just exist, but to actually live. The pottery class had become my escape, my space where I could get lost in the smooth texture of clay, where I could shape something tangible, something real. It was the first time in a long time that I felt in control, not just of my life, but of the very moments I spent creating. It felt like I was rebuilding myself, one piece at a time, just like the pieces of clay I worked with. Robert and I had become closer, but we had taken our time. There were no expectations, no pressures. He respected the space I needed, and I respected the fact that he wasn't trying to rush things. We were two people in the middle of our own healing processes, trying to find each other without losing ourselves. It was a slow, steady rhythm, and for once, I didn't feel like I was being pulled in a million directions. But there was still something in me, something unsettled, that I couldn't quite shake. Every time I sat in the quiet of the house, when I looked around and saw the empty space where James's things used to be, I felt a pang in my chest. I missed him. I missed his laughter, his energy, the chaos he brought with him when he was home. But I also knew he was where he needed to be, and I was where I needed to be. The balance wasn't perfect, but it was mine. One Friday afternoon, after a particularly challenging pottery session, I found myself staring at my phone. It was James. He hadn't called in a while, and his messages had become more sporadic over the last few weeks. I knew he was busy with his studies, and I didn't want a push, but the distance between us still felt like a canyon sometimes. I hadn't realized how much I missed him until I saw his name flash on the screen. "Mom, can we talk?" My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the text for a moment before responding, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed out a reply. "Of course, when? Tomorrow, if you're free, I need to ask you something." I didn't know what it was, but I knew this wasn't just a casual check-in. There was something in his message that made my stomach tighten, a feeling of uncertainty that echoed the way I had felt for months, like there was something unsaid between us that needed to be brought into the light. The next day, I drove to the small cafe where we used to meet for lunch when he was home. It was the same place where we had shared so many quiet moments, the place where we used to talk about everything and nothing. I was nervous, but there was a part of me that was hopeful. Hopeful that this conversation would bring us back together in a way that wasn't just about me being his mother, but about us being real with each other. When I arrived, I saw him sitting at a table by the window, staring out at the street, lost in thought. He looked older somehow, more grown up than the last time I had seen him, but there was still something so familiar about the way he sat. I could almost see the boy he had been, the one who used to share his wild ideas with me, the one who had always needed my advice. I walked over to the table and he looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of relief and something else, something deeper, something more uncertain. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly, standing up to hug me. His embrace was warm, but there was a hesitancy in the way he held on to me, like he wasn't sure where we stood anymore. "Hey, James," I replied, my voice soft. I sat down across from him, suddenly unsure of what was coming. He took a deep breath, his fingers playing with the edge of his cup. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us, about everything that's happened." I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "I've been thinking a lot, too. I've been feeling like I've been running away from you," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Like I left without really saying goodbye, and I know you've been dealing with a lot, and I didn't want to add to it, but I should have been there more, I should have been more present." I felt a lump form in my throat. "James, you don't have to apologize. You're doing what you need to do, I get it. You're growing up. I can't keep holding on to you, trying to keep you here." He looked at me, his expression softening. "But that's just it. I don't think I've been growing up, Mom. I think I've been running away from growing up. I've been running from the reality of what's happening with you, with me, with everything. I didn't know how to handle it, but I've been thinking about it, and I realized that I've been holding onto the past, holding onto what we had, and I wasn't letting myself move forward." I stared at him, my heart swelling with pride and sadness at the same time. "You don't have to hold onto the past, James. You can move forward, and so can I." He looked down at his coffee, his hand tightening around the cup. "I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared that if I let go of the past, I'll forget it, that I'll forget you, and everything you've done for me." I reached across the table and put my hand on his. "James, you'll never forget. You'll carry me with you just like I'll carry you with me. But we both have to let go or we'll be stuck in the same place forever." His eyes met mine, and I saw the vulnerability there, the fear of change, of what it meant to truly let go. But there was something else too, a glimmer of understanding, of acceptance. "I think I'm ready," he whispered. "I think I'm ready to let go. I think I'm ready to be who I'm supposed to be." Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pride, of relief, of finally knowing that he was ready and that I was too. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything we had said settling between us. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't all figured out. But for the first time, it felt like we were both moving forward, not running away from each other or the past, but moving toward the future. "I'm proud of you, James," I said quietly. "I'm proud of who you're becoming." He smiled, a real smile this time, the kind I hadn't seen in a long time. "Thanks, Mom, and I'm proud of you too, for letting go, for living for yourself." I smiled back, feeling something in me shift, something that had been stuck for so long finally start to move. It wasn't over. There were still things to work through, still a journey ahead. But in that moment, I knew we were both going to be okay. The next chapter of our lives was unwritten, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to write it. Together. It was hard to believe that so much had changed in such a short time. The house, once filled with the hum of life and the rush of endless responsibilities, had transformed into a place of peace, of reflection, and, above all, of hope. I had learned to live with the silence, to embrace it, to find meaning in the stillness. And even though James had moved out, I didn't feel the absence of him in the way I once had. There was a new understanding between us, a mutual respect for the spaces we each needed to grow. The pottery class had become more than just a hobby, it had become a symbol of my journey. Each piece of clay I molded, each pot I shaped, was a reflection of the rebuilding I was doing within myself. The process wasn't always smooth or easy, but it was beautiful in its own way, just like life. I had learned that sometimes, the cracks in a person's life could make them even stronger, and like the pots I created, we could be remade, even more beautiful after being broken. Robert had become a part of my life, but it wasn't in the way I had expected. It wasn't about rushing into something. It was about supporting each other, allowing space for growth, and most importantly, being there for each other without the weight of expectations. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and it didn't need to be. It was real. It was honest. And that, in itself, felt like the greatest gift. One evening, after a quiet dinner at his place, Robert and I sat on his porch, the night air cool against our skin. We had been talking about nothing in particular, just the way things had been going, how we both felt like we were finally starting to breathe. "I never thought I'd be here, Ella," Robert said, his voice soft in the night. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. Not just someone who's been through the same kind of pain, but someone who gets it, who understands that it's okay to not have everything figured out." I smiled, feeling the warmth of his words fill me. "I think that's the beauty of it, Robert. We don't have to have everything figured out. We just have to keep showing up, keep learning, keep living." He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the stars above us. "You've taught me that," he said, a tenderness in his voice that made my heart swell. "And I think I'm finally starting to understand what it means to really live." For the first time in a long time, I felt complete. Not because everything in my life was perfect, far from it, but because I had accepted the imperfections, the unknowns, the messiness of it all. I had allowed myself to stop running, to stop hiding, and to truly step into the life I was meant to live. The following months were filled with more moments of peace, of quiet joy. James would call every so often, and we would talk, sometimes about nothing at all, sometimes about everything. But there was no more tension between us, no more fear that we were losing each other. We were finding new ways to connect, new ways to be family. I continued with my pottery, slowly turning my passion into something I could share. I started selling some of the pieces at local markets, and the joy I felt seeing others appreciate my work was unlike anything I had expected. It wasn't about the money, it was about the validation that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. Robert and I spent more time together, but not in a way that felt rushed or overwhelming. We enjoyed the simple things, walks in the park, quiet dinners at home, sitting in silence with a cup of coffee, just being in each other's presence. We had both been through so much, and now it felt like we were finally finding our way to something real. And then, one afternoon, as I sat in my pottery studio, shaping a new piece, the doorbell rang. It was James. When I opened the door, he stood there, a little awkward, a little unsure. He looked the same, but also different, more mature, more grounded. "Mom," he said, his voice tentative, "I've been thinking a lot, and I wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything, for not being there, for not understanding." I stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. But then, without thinking, I pulled him into a hug. "You don't need to apologize, James. We're figuring it out together." "I know," he said, pulling back slightly, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And I just wanted to let you know that I'm proud of you, Mom. I see how far you've come, and I'm glad we're both moving forward." Tears welled up in my eyes as I held him. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my son back, not in the way I had expected, but in the way that mattered most. Later that evening, Robert and I sat on the porch again, this time with James joining us. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was real. It was us in this moment together, finding our way back to each other. I looked at them both, the two men who had changed my life in ways I never could have imagined, and I realized that the journey I had started wasn't about finding perfection. It was about finding the courage to keep going, to keep living, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. To everyone who has joined me on this journey, thank you. Thank you for being part of this story, for allowing me to share a piece of my life with you. I hope it has reminded you that no matter what happens, no matter how hard life gets, we can always rebuild. We can always start again. May you all find the strength to embrace your own journey, to let go of what weighs you down, and to make space for what really matters. Here's to new beginnings, to growth, to love, and to the people who make it all worth it. Wishing you all health, happiness, and love. Thank you for being here. With all my heart, Ella.